Hello, everyone. We are live again to do a Q&A for two fascinating films. Very interesting films that talk about the correction system from two different points of view. One of them is about the executioners and the death penalty, and the other one is the education in the prison system. Let me quickly introduce you our two filmmakers whose names you can already see under their names. So Rick Stack's career has been dedicated to social justice and still is, working in the Jackson County, Missouri Public Defender's Office, where he observed mistakes, large and small, made daily in the criminal justice system, led to his questioning the reliability of severe sanctions based on a system susceptible to human error. In the film, in The Executioner's Shadow, he is co-producer and primary researcher and subject matter specialist. He lined up, drafted, and conducted most of the interviews and provided much of the contextual background information. He has published two books. He has probably published more than two books, but the two books, Dead Wrong, Violence, Vengeance, and the Victims of Capital Punishment, and Grave Injustice, Unearthing Wrongful Executions, informed and inspired the documentary on which he collaborated with director Maggie Burnett Stogner. Maggie Burnett Stogner, who is unfortunately not with us, is the executive director of the Center for Environmental Filmmaking and a professor of film and media arts at American University. In 2005, she launched Blue Bear Films and continued to direct, produce, and write internationally broadcast documentaries such as Gold Mountain in 2016 and independent films such as The Executioner's Shadow, which is the first one in today's program. That's a 2017-18 film, which we had the honor of screening in our film festival. We also have Paul Sutton, who is the director of Straight from the Pen. And Paul thinks of himself not so much as a filmmaker who discovered a passion, but as a passionate criminal justice reformer who discovered film as an ideal way to communicate. With a PhD in criminal justice, Dr. Sutton's research and publications cover the gamut of justice issues from police to prisons. But it was a tour of the penitentiary of New Mexico that launched Sutton's filmmaking career with the Emmy-winning Doing Time, his first feature documentary about prison. The current documentary shows a situation where he and his college student went into a prison and implemented a creative writing program, and we are going to come back and talk about that. So, welcome to two of you, both of you, fascinating filmmakers and producer, co-producer, and it's an honor for us to have your films, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you in public for making the films available free of charge, need I underline, so that as many people as possible can view them and understand the prison system from different points of view. The film that we are showing later today is also about the prison system. It's called Inside Outside by Nandini Sikand, and we are going to have the pleasure of hearing her out together with the two of you again at 5:30 p.m. on our live Meet the Filmmakers chat. So my first question usually has to do with the idea of the film. So the first question being, how did the idea of this film come to you? Let's start with Rick. Okay. And then we'll go to Paul.
Okay. A concept as big as the death penalty is so overwhelming for people to think about that for the most part, they don't. And that's one of the reasons a problem like the death penalty persists, is because people just don't think about it. So what we wanted to do was humanize the problem, bring it down to human scale, put human faces on the issues, and show how the death penalty is destructive in so many different ways, so many dimensions that people don't even think about. And our title character, the former chief executioner of the state of Virginia, Jerry Givens, who unfortunately died from COVID back in April. So I want to dedicate this presentation to Jerry. People don't think about that there is a human being that's involved with the pushing of the button or the pulling of the lever. They don't think necessarily about the humans who are leaving behind a loved one who's about to be executed. We don't give enough thought to the victims of the crime. So we just really wanted to raise the visibility of all of the various human dimensions of this issue and get people thinking and talking.
And it was very successfully done. But I'm going to come back to that after we let Paul tell us how the idea of doing a creative writing course in the prison system came to him, and how to, of course, how to make a documentary out of it came to him.
Let me come at that a little bit differently, because that would take up about half of our next session, never mind all of this one. Part of my teaching has always been to take people into the reality that I'm talking about. And I started that back when I was an assistant professor at the University of New Mexico, when I took the students on the tour of the penitentiary of New Mexico. The resulting film there is just like the resulting films in all the other films, the 4 major documentaries I've done. And that is, I see the students' reaction to the reality, and I go, you didn't get the whole picture. There's more. In fact, let me see if I can tell you what you might have missed, and at the same time, share it with everybody and enlarge the audience. So all of my films, including the one about the writing class, were films that came along well after I did something. And then I went, wait a minute, we could make a film about that and actually educate more than the 30 people in my class. The idea of actually teaching a writing class came from one of the tours. And I did those tours for 33 years. So we had a lot of experiences during that time, but I met the leader of the Mexican Mafia prison gang in prison. And he was doing a kind of a writing experiment with a group of inmates he had at Mule Creek State Prison in California. And so I started my students on a long distance interactive program where they kind of mentored the inmates who were writing. And that one blew up in a disaster because of prison guards and a whole nother story, as we say in Kansas. But I thought, if we could do the same kind of thing in our local prison and actually go in and work face to face with the inmates, it actually might work. And we did it for 3 years before I decided to try to capture it in film, because it worked so well. Yeah. So I told you it was going to be a long answer. My apologies.
Well, it's very interesting, because my next question is about the challenge of having so much footage and how to put it together in a way, in a coherent way, so that it becomes a film within 50 minutes, 51 to 5 minutes, that you can actually watch from beginning to end. I'm sure both of you, in each of your cases, you had a lot more footage than we see in the film.
We had 80 hours of footage, and this is my first and probably last and only documentary that I'll be working on. I write books. It's much easier to write a book than it is to do a film. And I gained a great appreciation for the editor, who weaves the stories together, seamlessly, and the ruthless nature of cutting 80 hours of film down to 1 hour, a PBS hour at that, about 55 minutes. So yes, there's much left on the cutting room floor, as they say. And we're actually hoping to use some of those snippets in other websites and present them in other ways. But yeah, that's definitely one of the challenges.
A totally different process, because with a book, if you have an idea that you didn't cover, you can add a chapter. or but you can take a book that is 12, 15 chapters or whatever, and then somebody tells you, can you summarize this into a pamphlet? Then, it's like, oh, wait a minute. So Paul, how did you meet that challenge?
Well, it's the same challenge. I mean, but it's even greater now. The first film we did, Doing Time, we shot in 16 millimeter film. Every minute we shot was money. Now with digital, you can shoot forever and it's free. The only thing that you're limited by is how long the prison will let you sit inside the bars and record. So I can't even tell you how many hours. I can tell you how many feet we had in Doing Time. In this one, well, and to answer the question more directly, my films start out being about 2.5 hours edited. Now, part of the problem is I had to teach myself filmmaking. I mean, and I don't do the shooting because I can't hold a camera straight, but I do the directing, a lot of it, and I do the editing, all of it. And other than when my wife Lori, who co-produced this, says it's too long, and I go, well, what can I cut out? It all has to be there. And you just have to cut and slash and burn because nobody wants anything longer than 60 minutes, including film festivals. They don't want an 80 or 120-minute film. They just don't have the room for it. Yeah. So the challenge is always, well, the challenge is not only what do you leave out, but what film do you want to make?
Yes.
Because when we shoot a film, we're like when we shot one that's called Santos, about an artist in San Quentin who's a brilliant, who was a brilliant artist. We shot it and we're shooting, and a bunch of inmates came over. They saw what we're doing. They're saying, hey, we're doing a play over in the chapel. Do you want to come shoot it? And of course, Lori is, absolutely, let's go. And I said, that's not the film we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be
it
very...
It became the film we were making.
Yeah. You have to be like an executioner in this case.
In a sense.
Yeah.
We shot almost everything that people invited us to shoot. And as a result, we've got several films in there. Now we have to parse them out and figure out which footage goes in which film.
And you can make several different films all on the prison system. And it could be fascinating, but then it can't be all in one film. Right. So the highlights, can each one of you give me quickly the highlights of your experience?
I'm going to borrow from my co-producer, Maggie Stogner, who, when the first time we screened our film, was asked, what was the biggest surprise in your experience filming this documentary? And she said, and I agree, never in my life would I have thought I would make an executioner a friend of mine. And Jerry became more than that. So the human connection of all that's going on here, I think, is what my greatest takeaway.
Actually, that is very, very interesting, because that point was very successfully underlined, because we are judgmental, whether we are for the death penalty or against the death penalty. We are judgmental about the people who operate it, the people who don't operate it, the people who are for it, and the people who are against it. But by looking at your film, you realize that somebody can turn around, somebody can realize that. And even at the beginning, he was talking about when he pushes the button, it's one thing. When he has to inject someone, it's a completely different thing. So it's always very interesting to see the human connection. And that comes across very interestingly in Paul's film with the students and their interaction with the inmates, and also the way the inmates express themselves. What I also liked very much is when you were presenting the inmates, there was the name, but next to it, it didn't say inmate, it said writer. Mm-hmm. And underneath the prison where they are in, which already gives them a different way of looking at themselves. Can you comment on that?
Yes. That was a very conscious decision, but it was all the way through the class. We didn't talk to them or about them as inmates or prisoners. It was always, we're all writers here, and we're here to help each other. And I have to say, given the caliber of writing by the students, because they wrote right alongside the prisoners, I think we had to exaggerate a little bit when we put writer next to the students' names. The prisoners turned out to be much, much better writers. And I think possibly, maybe only because they had such better stories. I mean, they have a whole lifetime of pain and suffering and anguish and adventure. The issue was getting them to share it. And that was the major thing that the students did, is to provide an audience for those guys. Because nobody, like I said in the beginning of the film, nobody cares about you. And for a lot of the audiences that we first hit, nobody cares about these guys. The people who sit in our audiences tend to be soft-hearted, liberal, bleeding hearts. Oh, woe is me, poor guys. And I told them, that's not how we're going to portray you. So get ready for that. And they played along. I think, to tap back on one of the questions that Rick answered, one of the most memorable and moving parts of our experience was in Rivertown Film Festival in New Jersey, when we showed the film to a packed house, which surprised me. And at the end of it, up goes the hand, and it's like, uh-oh, here comes the bomb. Hard, the guy had everything but a hard hat on. And he says, yeah, when I started watching this film and that inmate got up there and said what he did, and you said nobody cares about you, that's exactly what I thought. And I thought, oh, shit, how long is this going to go on? He says, but I changed my mind.
That's great.
After watching these guys, he said, I'm of a completely different mind. Now, I don't know if you fooled me. I don't know if you pulled the wool over my eyes, but at least I'm willing to listen.
Yeah.
And I went, that's all we can ask for. That's what we're after.
That's a very nice positive note to end on. Unfortunately, we have to sign out of here and sign into our next session, which is scrolling as we are speaking. Meet the Filmmakers chat that will continue this conversation, because we will have Rick and Paul with us in that session. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm looking to see if there are any comments. I don't see any. People are going to wise up later once this is posted. You can still post your comments, and we'll gladly share them with the filmmakers. Okay, thank you very much, and join us in the next chat. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You know.